Hello, everyone. Great to be here. This is the India Global Forum, IGF Studios. We're going to have a range of some really interesting and exciting conversations today, ranging from supply chains to where India is positioned to economic reform and a whole lot of other subjects is going to continue all day long. Remember, you can join the conversation, do tweet, do ask any questions, do refer to any themes and topics you want us to talk about. We'll be very happy to take some of your questions as well and put them to people. You can just talk to us, communicate with us using hashtag IGF London. But let's get started with the very first session. There's so much talk about what's happening with China plus one, are supply chains moving, are they not moving? And where does India position itself in all this? So joining us to discuss all of that, Chris Rogers, Head of Supply Chain Research at S&P Global Market Intelligence. Chris, to come up and join us. We have with us Dr. Vijay Chuthaivale, who's in charge of the Foreign Affairs Department of the Bharatiya Janata Party.
Hi.
Fresh from an election victory. Numbers may have been not quite what you wanted, Vijayji, but fresh from an election victory. So thank you for being with us. And it's always a great pleasure to have joining us Dr. Surjit Bhalla, former Executive Director, International Monetary Fund, joining us virtually. But Dr. Bhalla, great to have you with us as well. I think. Oh, there you are. There you are. Great to be hearing from you. Let's start by taking a look at, there's this entire question that we're going to be having today about resilience. There are obviously choppy waters. There are choppy waters in the Middle East. There are choppy waters between Russia and Ukraine, a war that people seem to have forgotten, seeing as so much else is happening. Talk about who knows what's happening in the South China Sea, what is China doing to the Philippines, what could China do to Taiwan. So in all of this, supply chain questions have suddenly become very major. Could you, before we get into where India is positioned in all of this, maybe you could give us a slightly broader view. Is there a lot of concern around supply chains, and how are people adjusting?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that nobody talked about supply chains in these sort of forums. Clearly, there've always been supply chains. There's always been procurement managers who've kind of sat at big business meetings going, help. But we've known for years that supply chains are very difficult to operate. We've known for years that there are structural weak points and choke points in global logistics networks, and yet always supply chains find a way to deliver. Even during the height of the pandemic, remember a lot of the issues during the pandemic were demand-driven for supply chains rather than actual failures in manufacturing, failures of logistics. Aside from all of the medics who helped us during that period, it was the factory workers, the shippers, the sailors, many of whom are from India, who made sure everything got to where it needed to go to. The challenge going forward is to make sure we learn those lessons and invest in resilience technologies, in resilience business practices. And certainly in our research at S&P Global, we see a real concern that that's being cut back. Companies are actually talking less about supply chains and investing in resilience than they were just a year ago. And I think that may be saving up problems. As you mentioned, we have a number of conflicts ongoing at the moment, the potential for more. Next year, we have political uncertainties in a number of the major democracies in the world. It was a delight to see India's elections go as smoothly as they did. And I think that opens up opportunities for companies who are forward-looking in their supply chain resilience to build a competitive advantage at this point.
Right. So, Dr. Chuthaivale, before I come to Dr. Bhalla, is there obviously a very clear opportunity for India in all of this, right? Because as all of that churn is happening, India says that, look, we're an area of stability. It's the same government which is back for the third time. Okay, you could argue about the numbers, but the government is back for the third time. And there seems to be a certain measure of continuity that the government is also pushing for in terms of all the ministers more or less staying put where they are. Is this going to be an important aspect of what India is going to be doing now in economic policy, to say, move your supply chains, plug us into global supply chains, and we would like to be that China plus one or whatever other territory plus one that you're thinking of?
I think if you see this year in the democratic world, a lot of elections are taking place in many countries, and there is uncertainty everywhere. In major part of the Europe, we have elections in France. Here in this country, there are elections. US elections is also another question mark. So in all this scenario, India has come out as a bright spot, not only by successfully conducting elections, but giving a very clear mandate. And that mandate is of a continuity and of a stability, which is very important in this uncertain world. And I therefore must congratulate the maturity of Indian electorate that they have given a very clear verdict in favor of Prime Minister Modi. Saying that, it also means, and also the ministry also is almost the same as that of last term, it means that there will be continuity of the policies, and there will be, therefore the investors can take the long term shots on India, and I guess this gives a very great opportunity for the global investor to see India as an alternate hub to China plus one or whatever their alternate supply chain strategies, and also as a manufacturing hub. Surjit will talk more about PLI and other schemes which have been initiated by the last government, and more things would be added to this. So, in a nutshell, I guess it's a great opportunity for the global investors to seriously evaluate India as alternate production site.
So let me just get one more political question in before we turn to the economics of it. You said that it's been a mandate, and the mandate is there is going to be stability. So there are two aspects to that, of course. The fact that the numbers weren't quite what people were expecting, in a sense, underlines democratic resilience. There was a lot of concern in forums like this even 1 year ago that is there democratic backsliding, and what is the health of the Indian democracy like? To that extent, those predictions about the demise of Indian democracy perhaps were a little bit premature?
I would say it's a little weird argument that if the election result go in certain way, then there is a democratic stability, and if that doesn't go in certain
But the
way,
fact that so many millions of people came out, there was a number. The elections
as
went
long as the process is clean, transparent, and also equitable, and which is the Indian electoral process, whosoever wins, the world needs to accept it rather than prejudging that if someone wins, no, that the democracy is in danger. This is a perverted argument.
Okay.
So I have completely.
And you're reasonably confident that the 5 years, it is going to be 5 years, it is stable, the support.
It's 5 years till 29, there is no danger to this government, and you will see that in future, this government will go from strength to strength.
Okay. Dr. Balla, let me get you in then on the economic policies, right, which are being followed. To what extent is the integration of India into international supply chains, global supply chains, becoming a manufacturing hub, saying move your electronics, move your auto, move, maybe even semiconductors, move a lot of those to India. To what extent do you think this has been a priority, and how do you think that message is going in the rest of the world?
Yeah, thank you for having me. And good to see you, Vikram, after a long time. No, I think, look, all systems and all events conspiring in favor of India right now. Whether you want to look at the supply chains, the global, you started off with how the world was in conflict. It is. Strangely enough, they're all working in India's favor. Let me take the one conflict that is there, very prominent for all concerned, and which is broadly behind the topic of discussion, which is supply chains and China. Now, the political economy is in such a shape that everybody is looking for an alternative to China. The same thing happened in 2010 when China moved up the value-added chain. And India fell behind because we did not invoke policies that would help us to be a major player in the world supply chains, output, manufacturing, what have you. Now things have changed. And what has changed is that there's a much greater willingness to participate in the world economy, and there's a much greater willingness on the part of foreign investors to come to India for its output. So we have had a very successful growth trajectory over the last decade or so, and all, even in manufacturing, and I don't know whether we have the time to go into or not, but we lots of complaints about the low level of manufacturing sector in India. But as recent research is coming out by Mr. Goldar and others, that really a lot of the depressing results about the Indian manufacturing have to do with the fact of double deflation. And you know more about it, but I don't want. So, in other words, if you look at the data correctly, that actually manufacturing has improved quite radically over the last 5-7 years, and the share of manufacturing in GDP, and you have that the PLI scheme, which Vijay talked about, I think it's coming to place. It's a bit early to really evaluate how well it succeeded, but the trends are very, very encouraging. And we'll find out maybe over the next 6 months to a year as to how successful the PLI has been. In my view, and reading the data, it is coming out to be quite positive.
All right, I'm going to get into all of that, I think, in more detail. Also looking at what further steps perhaps need to be taken. We'll be throwing them to Sanjeev Sanyal also in just a short while. But, just if I could just, the basic premise behind all of this, that too much has been bet on China, too much has been invested in China, the risks are high, and nobody knows what's going to happen. Is that a cyclical thing that, the China doubting, and then everyone says, okay, let's stay away from China, and then after some time everyone forgets about it, and you forget about COVID, and you forget about the possibility of war with Taiwan, and things go back to normal. Is it cyclical, or this time, is it a situation that people are going to say, look, we need to find an alternative? Which is it? Then I have a follow-up question.
So I would say supply chain policy and implementation have two players, the government and private business. The governments get very hung up on the geopolitics, rivalry with China, US, Europe, India. Companies don't care about that. Companies care about what are policies, are they stable? Because what they've got to do is maximize their profit, minimize their risk. So if reallocating towards India brings you a huge market to sell directly into, supportive economic environment, supportive policy environment with lower operational risks than maybe some of the ASEAN countries, they'll go for it. They're not leaving China because they're leaving China. In fact, they're not even leaving China. They're staying in China, but investing to sell there in the same way that they're coming to India to sell there and do exporting, and they're moving back to North America as well. So is it cyclical? Yes, these issues come up on a cyclical basis, but it's always something with supply chains. In the 2016, 2018 period, US-China rivalry, then it's COVID, now we're back to rivalry with China. I think what's different this time is that the US has brought along its allies, particularly the Europeans who have their own arguments with China, particularly Japan, particularly South Korea. And that's what's different to in the past. And that's why, certainly when we speak to our customers, when we look at the data on trade flows, on manufacturing, we are actually seeing these changes actually happening now, which they haven't done in the past.
So if it is a bit more permanent or long-lasting this time around, and people are looking for an alternative, not just to China, but also perhaps in that entire region. I've heard a lot of people expressing concerns about Taiwan and the entire reliance of the semiconductor industry in Taiwan just because what happens if there's conflict. And people are looking for alternatives. That's where then the question comes, what does India have to do to make sure that you're the logical choice and not a Vietnam or back to the US or Mexico or some other option?
Yeah, so I think firstly, clearly there are concerns about individual companies having strong positions in individual sectors. It would be a mistake, though, to think that Taiwan was the only game in town when it comes to semiconductors. We're all very obsessed with AI chips and so on at the moment, and for sure that's a national security issue. But actually, when you look at the fastest growing manufacturing of semiconductors at the moment, it's in mainland China as they look to dominate the mature technologies. The challenge for India is to not just become an assembling center, but is to make sure it captures the full supply chain, the full, everything from the basic commodities through the basic manufactured goods through to the assembly, because that's how you avoid the fate that I think some of the ASEAN countries will face, which is if you're just doing the manufacturing part, that can disappear in an instant. Thailand and Vietnam have seen that already with the various tariff cases that the US has used in solar panels, in washing machines. So I think from a policy perspective, India needs to have that kind of full stack mentality. The good news is, I think, certainly we mentioned PLIs already. The PLIs seem to be aimed towards that. The active international trade policy seems to be pointing towards that as well.
Are we, Dr. Chitawale, is India actually targeting that full stack? And it seems to be that in certain sectors, there are a whole lot of policies that are coming up to do exactly what was being said. Take electronics, for example. And if Apple starts moving 20-25% of its production of iPhones to India, that'll be a major step. Because it's not just that one product, it's everything that's happening around it. Auto could be another such example. Is this pretty much the philosophy that's being followed by the government?
I think, right, and there are a couple of other sectors also where Government of India is actively pursuing, like pharma, for example, even textiles. So these are some of our traditional strengths, and these new sectors like semiconductors, electronic goods will be another green shoots in India's industrial policy.
All right, so it's not just the traditional sectors you're saying, because electronics is not traditionally a major Indian strength.
Yeah.
If it becomes one and you go from importing $100 billion worth of electronics,
mobile manufacturing, otherwise also we are now enhanced our indigenous productions to a significant extent.
Right. Dr. Bhalla, what are the policies that you think are being rolled out, have already been rolled out, that are being rolled out right now, and the policies that need to be rolled out to make sure that India does have that competitive edge in this field?
Well, one policy that I think needs to be changed, and it is pertaining to foreign investment, and in particular the policy that really any disputes between a foreign company and an Indian company has to be resolved in Indian courts. This is something we did not have that before, and I think it has hurt Indian enterprise as well as Indian manufacturing as well as growth. So other than this policy, I think many of our policies are really conducive to participating in the Great Leap Forward. I don't know we'll see what happens now with the new government, but you asked for what needs to be changed. What needs to be reinforced? They are already doing that. And I will mention one other policy in India that I think needs changing and improvement is our tax rates are too high. Not the corporate tax rate, which is now very, very stable, very, very competitive at 20%, 25% or so, but really the individual tax rate. So all of this can combine to get our growth rate on a sustained basis above 8% an annum. We're already averaging that, mind you. Okay? But this is now looking into the future. Whatever happens, we need to have a growth rate above 8% and continue with this and solidify the possibilities that it will be above 8%.
Right. Do you often hear that from companies whom you are advising? Because anecdotally, we keep picking up exactly the point that Dr. Bhalla was making. Everything else is great. Obviously, it's a fantastic market. Growth rate is there. Everything is okay. We're worried about the court system, about regulatory flip-flops, about, still red tape in some of these areas. More ease of doing business, in other words, is required.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we've developed whole product sets to help put together the whole. We want somewhere that's good value, but we also want somewhere that's got low risks in terms of changes in tax rate, changes in operational measures like regulatory burden, infrastructure disruption. Labour strikes is an issue. You've got to protect workers, but equally, companies don't like to go to places where workers have got too much power. Actually, always and everywhere, when we have these conversations, what we hear is, we don't care what the policy is, as long as we know what the policy is. It's the uncertainty that matters. Yes, if there's a high tax rate, we might say, thanks very much, we'll go somewhere else. If the tax rate is low and then you decide in a couple of years, actually, it's got to go up, or you used to have to get these permissions at the federal level, now it's at the state level, that's really challenging. And I think particularly for a company as big as India, where the states are so important, and the government clearly wants to ensure that states are lifted together, not that some are lifted more than others, ensuring consistency in state level implementation is really important. So keep it stable, I think is kind of the main message that we get from businesses.
Right. Dr. Chitafale, some of the important, a lot of reform has already taken place in India. A lot of the big problems that people used to associate with India, such as infrastructure, now think of the past, infrastructure has actually really been built at a massive scale. Some of the residual reform measures that Dr. Bhalla was talking about and other economists talk about are politically more tough, like farm changes or labor law changes. But what Dr. Bhalla was referring to right now and what Chris Rogers was referring to, that shouldn't be that difficult, because if you're just speeding up the system and making the judiciary work faster, the legal system work faster, and not having cases going on for decades altogether, this is something that actually should be relatively not easy to do, but certainly politically attractive to do as well.
I agree. And for the criminal justice system, that has already happened with the new, that Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita that will be implemented from 1st of July. So that part is already taken care of, and I am sure the government will work on the directions what Dr. Bhalla is talking about in the months and years to come.
You're right, that's a very major reform. That is the first major step that is coming.
Yeah,
it's just a few days away. Yeah. Will further tweaks be done even in that to make sure it becomes more and more friendly? Because other seditions have come, what other changes that can come into those?
Yeah, I think they will take these seditions very positively.
Take the sedition positively. So the intention is very clearly, you're telling us, to move in exactly that direction.
The lives of companies and enterprises very smooth and a very transparent manner, the policy with a consistent policy, as you were saying. Every policy may not be acceptable to everyone, but at least there will be some consistency.
Okay, so consistency is something you're saying will be there. Dr. Bhalla, the direction will be along the lines of what you're saying. We have 47 seconds to make any specific suggestions you want, because he did say the government's taking suggestions. So you have 40 seconds.
No,
yeah, your suggestions, specific suggestions, if you want to make.
No, the two I gave, the specific suggestion is, apart from these two policies, there are several other ones, but as you said, the legal system is politically easy to attack or to improve, and will have a lot of gains, efficiency gains. So I think we can get the big thrust forward, and we are ideally positioned for it politically and economically and internationally. So these confluence of these three factors have never before operated in India. We are in a very sweet spot, and I'm very confident that the government will take full advantage with policies that continue the sweet spot for at least the next decade or so.
All right, Dr. Bhalla, Dr. Chitafale, Chris Rogers, thank you so much. We do have Sanjeev Sanyal joining us in just a couple of minutes. I'm sure he's been listening to what all of you have said, and I'm sure a lot of that is actually on the agenda that the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister and others are actually working on. Thank you so much. Let's hope a lot of those changes come, and let's hope we do get that 8-9% at a rather consistent level in India as India continues to integrate into global supply chains. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.